So, I'm a very big believer in everything happens for a reason, and and people can look at the amount of empty seats and see these are empty seats, or they can see these are seats that are to be filled, and it's a good thing to think about, even when for a moment up on probably the first song, we got out a bit out of time, but it wasn't really noticeable. I noticed it, but doesn't mean that everyone else did. And in that moment, I was like, "Oh, that's right. We're not at the mercy of a computer or a piano. We're just doing this for Jesus." And for a second, I was taken from this like musical director back to humble servant of this is what I've got to do. And it was really cool. Even just think about that as we're trialing something new. And we can see like three of us up on stage if we're here singing, leading worship with you guys. And just like Julia said, she can hear a whole orchestra of people, of instruments and everything. It's all about your perception of how you take in what's happening around you. And that's a really good segue into what we're going to talk about today, which is Jonah Part 2. And so, 3 weeks ago, we spoke on Jonah. Jonah being quite a renowned character in the Bible, and renowned outside of Christian circles as well. If you went to most secular places and you talked about Jonah in the belly of the whale, people would know exactly what you're talking about, what story it is. Kind of like Noah's Ark, things like that. And if so Helen, if you could please put up the first slide there of. Yes, so we're going to do it through the view of what we talked about, which was the hero's journey, which is a encapsulated ideology around the process that people kind of go through on their inner conflicts and their transformation through a hard time into the like returning back into their kind of current reality of who they are as a person. And so last time we chatted, I looked at the whole hero's journey, and we gave a bit about the beginning and what that means. Someone's call to adventure, the initial withdrawal from that, and then after the withdrawal process, then there's the belly of the whale, which some people would call the time of meditation, of reflection, of the actual conflict in itself, going through your thought spaces and ending up with a revelation type experience, whether that's transformation, whether that's growth in itself. So the next slide, please, Helen. That's all right. Oh, Jonah. Yes. Ta-da, Jonah. That's what we're going to do. And the next one, please, as well. Okay. So we looked at the above the line of the known and unknown is what we in ourselves can understand the process of. So we look at what's happening with the current struggle that we're going through, and we see that we need some help to overcome this obstacle. We get the help, and then we come out the other end like, hooray, like we've done it. But then there's this whole other subtext of stuff that's going on underneath. And they bring their own challenges, and whether you get help, guidance through to overcome them, every single challenge is different. But through the through the belly of the whale time, you then get transformation and you are made aware of what you need to do next. So we're actually going to focus on the bit just before the man, which is the return. Okay? So this is what we're going to focus on in this time this morning. When we finished up with Jonah, when we were reading Jonah, we finished up basically at the time where the fish spat out Jonah. So he's already gone through the whole time inside the belly with all the boats that the whale had swallowed and all the other people who he was talking to, or not talking to. He was alone in there, actually. Yep, so I can't make that up. But all the gizzards, yep, all the fish guts and everything. So he's in there, and God tells the fish, spit him out, and so he spits him out. And Jonah, that's where we're picking up from. And it's interesting what happens. We're going to read it first to read through, and then by the end of this, by the end of today, we would have finished the whole of Jonah. Look at that, a book done. We're still going through Corinthians, but we can smash Jonah in 2 weeks. So this is good. So we're going to read through Jonah, and then we'll have a bit of a look into what it all means. Jonah, chapter 3, if you've got it there, or it should be... look at Helen, she's onto it. She's onto it. All those years of overheads, eh? Just like, switch on and off, that's it. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. Now Nineveh was a very large city. It took 3 days to go through it. Jonah began by going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming, 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. The Ninevites believed God. A fast was proclaimed, and all of them, from the greatest to the last, put on sackcloth. When Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. This is the proclamation he issued in Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, do not let people or animals, herds or flocks, taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink. But let people and animals be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call urgently on God. Let them give up their evil ways and their violence. Who knows? God may yet relent, and with compassion turn from his fierce anger, so that we will not perish. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring on them the destruction that he had threatened. But to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord, "Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it's better for me to die than to live." But the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. And there he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head, to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But at dawn, the next day, God provided a worm, which chewed the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "It is," he said, "and I'm so angry, I wish I were dead." But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend to it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? Okay, so cool story, great story. We start with, not only has Jonah, number one, first thing, has who here in their life has not liked someone, or has been jealous of someone, or has seen someone get something they thought they shouldn't get, and so was envious of what they got? Put their hand up. Good job. Everyone else? Yeah. Julia, think harder. Yeah. Now, I wasn't saying us right now. Do we do that right now? I'm just saying in our lives, have we done that? What happens is Jonah's just spent 3 days and 3 nights? Yeah. I just looked to Helen for my theological approval. I'm like, is it this? She's like, Good. So for 3 days, 3 nights, inside the belly of the whale, he gets spat out, and God still knows that he needs a reminder of what he has to do. Even though he's been through this hugely tumultuous time, he's been in the belly of the whale, he's smelling great, and even through all of that, knowing that transformation process happened with Jonah, he got to the point where God was like, cool, he's ready. He's like, cool, I will go to Nineveh, this is what I'll do. And then the fish spits him out, and yet again God says, now go to Nineveh. He has to be reminded of the call that God had for him. Because we can be in a situation in our lives where we are under struggle and we are under pressure, and then suddenly that pressure's gone, and we're like, oh, thank you, Lord, for your help. And then what actually God was trying to teach us, we don't actually end up learning the full lesson because we're just thankful there's no more pressure. And then we don't actually go and sort out the problem. We just get content with being thankful for the blessing of not being in trouble. We don't actually sort out the issue in the first place. I just ruined something else for later on. But it's okay. Everything happens for a reason. So, he then is like, cool, yep, I remember. This is what you said, Lord. I will go and do it. Big walk as well. Have you ever tried walking continuously for 3 days? If you've done a pilgrimage, you may have. If you're like me, and 250 meters, probably your limit. And so I can just imagine, I went to Disneyland once and walked for the entire day. My feet were killing me. If this took 3 days to get through, this is a big land. The amount of space that you can cover in a 24-hour period of not stopping walking is actually pretty impressive. But it took him that long. He's proclaiming the entire time what God's going to do, and he's telling people this. He's not really giving the way out. He's just saying Nineveh is going to be overthrown. That's what's happening. He's not saying, oh, God's going to save you. He's saying, this is what's going to happen. And the king says, who knows, maybe God will be compassionate towards us. When that happens, Jonah's still like, oh, see, I knew that you would be like the God of love and the God of compassion and the God of grace. Like these people deserve to be punished, and I knew that if I went and told them that they would turn away from their ways, and then you wouldn't punish them, but they deserve to be, because in humanistic perspectives, that what they were probably doing was they probably did deserve to be punished. But God's way of seeing things is a lot different to ours, and so Jonah turned around and got angry at God for being good. and frustrated that God kept his word of being a loving and gracious and compassionate God. That's frustrating. We see all the time in our lives people that do really bad things, and we think, oh, surely, like, they're too far from God saving. Like, that's not, that, no. I know of ministries that happen in prisons, and people hear of the things that people have done, and you hear stories of people, of missionaries going up to these people whose society would seem to be so low, and sharing the gospel with them, and these guys getting saved. And then we hear about what they've done, and we still judge them, and we're like, God saved you. Hang on a second. Why would he do that? He's loving, and he's compassionate, and he's gracious, and he's merciful, and he say, I get why he saved me, but I haven't done the things that you've done. And that can bring up weird feelings for us. That can really kind of show us our weaknesses. And it can also show us our insecurities. And it's okay for people to get angry at God because we don't understand his plan. When we get angry at God, we're actually getting angry at the fact that we don't know everything. We're not getting angry at him. We're getting angry at the fact that we can't see what God sees. And if we were actually in tune with our emotions, we'd be able to see that everything happens for a reason. And there's a reason why God, in his greatness, chose to save me and this person over here. And we're human. We are sinful. We're fallible. I know people might think that there's some people out there may think there's nothing wrong with them. And for the most part, according to our perspectives, that may be true. But according to God's perspective, we are all sinful. And so we do fall into the trap of being jealous, envious, and wanting reasoning for different things. Jonah gets in this place of like, I just wanted them to burn. I just wanted them gone. And I knew it wasn't going to happen, which is why I wanted to go to Tarshish in the first place, because I didn't want to tell them because they deserved this and everything. I knew it was going to, I knew God. Like, I knew what was going to happen anyway. That's pretty boastful of him, that he knew this is going to happen. He knew what God was planning the whole time. Oh, I knew this would happen. How many times have we looked in our lives and been like, oh, I knew that would happen. I knew that's the way it would go. I knew that Damon and Kim would get married. Knew it. Dang it. I'm kidding. Love you guys. But when we pretend, because that's what we're doing, at that moment we're pretending, all we do is we're matched with new information, and then that information doesn't quite like go harmoniously into our heart because we have our own prejudices and everything in there. And so when we get new information in, we then judge according to what our conditioning is. Okay? And so we're conditioned to that justice happens and good happens to good people, bad happens to bad people. Something comes that contradicts with that, and we feel weird and icky. And that feeling is what Jonah was going through. So God likes to play a little bit of not an experiment on Jonah, but he wants to teach him another lesson in this. And he says to Jonah, he doesn't say anything. Jonah wants to see, I don't know, the brimstone falling from the sky. He wants to see the city just get destroyed. And so he puts himself on this little like hill, and he builds a shelter. Funnily enough, like when we want to do our own thing, we try and provide for ourselves. Little side note, that was for free. But God says, God looks at it and is like, oh, even though he's built himself a shelter, like there's some of it that's not covered or anything, I'm going to make a tree come up overnight and it's going to shelter him. He's going to have some shadow and everything. He'll love it because God knows what we love. And so God brings us up and is like, this is opportunity for me to teach Jonah something else. So then he gets a worm, and a worm to eat a whole tree, I reckon it's probably the size of, a small dog, this caterpillar. And this caterpillar eats the entire tree, gone, all these leaves, overnight. Jonah's like, oh, again? I just want to die. Also, side note, when we are feeling like we have gone through a bad time, then we come out of it and we reset back to like our life, back to what it is. How over dramatic can someone be? You didn't do what you said, oh, kill me now. And then something happens, just like I'm getting sunburnt. Oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. Kill me now. It's like it kind of loses its effect after the first time. The second time you're like, come on, Jonah. You're being a bit over the top. It was a worm. God says, you did nothing to make the plant grow. And so why should you get upset when it dies? And then that's put into perspective. And this is why we're talking about perspective earlier. Because what one person can see with their eyes, somebody else can see with completely different eyes. And you can see a situation where someone might look at Nineveh and see that is a whole lot of people that God could save. Someone else could be like, that's a whole lot of people that God should punish. Someone else could be like, that's a whole lot of people that I don't know and I don't really care about knowing them, so I'm pretty indifferent. There's lots of those people around as well who don't really mind getting in other people's business, and they're just like, oh, leave that to them. And because the perspective was so one-sided for Jonah, even though he had this time in the belly of the whale, which he probably went through the process in the belly of the whale where he thought, what if God saves Nineveh? Because he's in the whale, he's in a bad time. He's like, actually, I'd be okay with that. He probably went through that scenario in his head. He went through everything. He's got 72 hours inside this fish that he's like, yep, maybe that's a possibility. Even if that's a possibility to get out of this whale, I'd be fine with that. Suddenly he's out of it. He forgets everything. And that's purely my projecting onto the text because we don't know that that's exactly what Jonah was thinking during that time. That's just my interpretation of it. You can take that or you can have your own, that's fine. When it comes to that, because Jonah sees everything from his perception and God's perspective is different, God doesn't just stay with, you did nothing for the plant, so why are you upset that the plant's now gone? He takes it one step further and says, why would you not be compassionate about people who, what's the similarity between these people, like who can't tell their right from their left hand and doesn't know most of the animals? Most of us, but also like children. Children, give me a left hand and they'll just give you a hand. And 50% of the time it's the right one, so then you give them a reward. Good job, left hand. But then you say, what's that? It's a horse. No, it's a zebra. What's that? It's a horse. No, it's a giraffe. They just see something on four legs, like it's a horse. And if you can't tell, God's saying, view these people as children. If they don't know, why would I punish them for not knowing? Even though he had every right to punish. And that's because God brings out compassion. He's got grace and love and everything 100%. But the word that the Bible chooses to bring out is compassion here. Compassion's a cool one because when being in the kind of self-development space and everything, when I'm coaching my clients, I always tell people that there are places and times for every one of these three things, but the one that you want to rest on that doesn't sacrifice any of you is compassion. So the first one is sympathy. Some people can use an excuse and say, I'm just very sympathetic towards people. Like, that's how I am. I'm sympathetic to the situation. What sympathy does energetically for someone, like in how they operate, what sympathy does is it validates how that person is feeling and lets them continue feeling sorry for themselves. Having sympathy for someone is like, oh, I can see what you're going through, like that. That must be so tough, and there is a time and a place for that, but often what it does is it doesn't help that person grow, it just validates what they're already feeling and doesn't serve the situation at all. Then you might have empathy. Empathy is a bit more of a lighter topic regarding it, because it's actually society deems Society deems it actually quite a good thing to be empathetical to people, to be able, hey, if you were in their shoes. And so empathy is, I'm actually putting your shoes on. And so what empathy does is it takes their feelings and puts it on you. So now there's two people feeling the same thing. And that is just growing that attitude and that emotion, which, of course, again, prefix, subtext, there's a time for empathy as well. But empathetical people, they often will feel drained, tired, burnt out, because they're taking everyone's stuff onto them and they're feeling that and they're like, oh, this is actually super tiring. And so that sacrifices their own self because they're taking everything in from everybody else. So sympathy, okay, I'm not saying good or bad, but I'm like, sympathy, empathy, probably not. The one that they choose to focus on is compassion. Because what compassion does is it takes the sympathetical and the empathetical approach to the conversation, an approach to the person, and it takes that and it says, I can see exactly why you're feeling the way that you are, and I can acknowledge that and be respectful of what you're going through, and now I'm going to help you move on. I'm not discrediting what they're feeling, but I am going to challenge them to how can we grow? And that's the natural development of someone's relationship with people. You see someone hurting, your instinct isn't to want to see them continue hurting, but often we actually just don't know what to do when someone is hurting. So we're like, I want to relate more, so I want to feel it, and then once I can feel it, then it's a big process. And it's actually not. Having compassion for someone is just seeing the person for where they are, where they're at, and then in love choosing to help that person to grow. Compassion for a person who's not saved by grace is seeing someone for the sin that they're in and for the opportunity that they have and helping someone meet that. Compassion that God has for this is seeing someone for where they're at, seeing their heart of wanting to change and being like, I'm going to be the one who saves you in all of that, which is really cool. Compassion's brought out 3 times, I think, in this text. If the name Beau was mentioned in the Bible, I'd be like, oh, this is great. If it happened twice, I'd be like, okay, guys, this is getting serious now. Beau, twice in the Bible. Not once, twice. If it's mentioned 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 7, you want to start listening to it because there's meaning around that word. If there's one word in the Bible, it's important enough to be there for thousands of years. If it's said more than once, there's a reason why it hasn't been changed and why the Holy Spirit put it there in the first place. So what is it about compassion that will literally change the world? and having compassion towards people, seeing people for where they are, and that drive inside you out of love to want to see them to grow is huge. I could leave the sermon right there and you've gotten everything that you needed to. But I'm only half an hour in. We've got another 2 hours left. So, following on from that, we don't actually, so that was actually, compassion is actually pretty much the main point of this. But I wanted to bring out just the end of what happens. Is there is no resolution to this story. Jonah ends with God saying, they don't know their right from their left, or the animals. That's how Jonah ends. We don't actually, we don't get the rest of the story. It's like a cliffhanger. Come in like in 2 years' time once we finish filming, and we can watch the next season. We don't find out what happens, but we know that God is a God of His word. And so if He said He's going to save them, He's going to save. There's a lot of subtext to this that would be like, we know what happened. Sure, Jonah probably didn't get his wish of God just smiting him, and learned a lesson, because when God had told him previously stuff, he was like, oh, actually, you know what? I'll come around. I've heard this. Often in our lives as well, when we hear something once, twice, 3 times, and then we can be a whole lot less susceptible to want to take that information on. But then when we have an experience where we change and we grow and we develop ourselves, and God comes in here and chips it a little bits away and makes us to look more like Him, then we hear the thing that we've heard 4 times before the change, and we hear it once and we're like, oh, that's it. When you're accustomed to hearing God's voice, then you're like, this is Jesus, this is the way I'm going, this is the direction I'm following. So maybe it's that. Maybe we can assume from the end of it that because God said this, then Jonah's like, oh, you know what? That's right. I'll stop being overdramatic. I'll stop being woe is me, and I'll start being, let's just trust in you, God, because this is what you say. When we get to, oh my goodness, just jumped into the Bible. When we get into the nitty-gritty of everything that Jonah's story teaches us, we come to the point where it's not about running. Jonah's story isn't about running. And I also believe that every single story in the Bible relates somehow back to Jesus and His resurrection, and everything points to the gospel and everything, but that's a whole different discussion for a different day. But when it comes to Jonah, it's not about the fact that he was scared of what God told him to do and thought he could run away. Yes, we can somehow, in our own minds, think about when we've done that, but that's not the reason for the story. And the reason for the story is not this part of this time in the boat where the other people are saying when he's on the way to Tarshish, and the other people are saying, oh, it's you. You're the person that's causing all the trouble. We've got to throw you overboard. And we can think in our own lives, when we see someone that's in trouble or see that they're the problem, and be like, oh, you're the one that's causing all of this. You need to go sort out your problems. Sure, we can think about that. That's not the reason for the story. Then the story isn't about that if you do something and you try to run away from God, then He's going to send a whole lot of water first and then a whale to come to eat you, and then you're going to spend three days in there. Sure, symbolistic, sure, metaphorical, but it's not just saying that if you run away from God, that He's going to bring a hard time for you to get you out of that. It's symbolistic, it's metaphorical, and it's cool to think about, and we can think in our own times when we've tried to do our own thing and God just kind of whips us back into shape. But that's not the meaning of the story. And it's not about the fact that God eventually got His way with Jonah going to Nineveh and telling everything. that he was supposed to in the first place. We can feel like at times, yep, cool, we've got the task. Then we do it like, yep, we've done what God wants us to do. Hands off. Sweet. Sure, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to look at. However, not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is, and I wrote it in such a nice way that I want to read it exactly as I said it. Faith is not simply about fulfilling a task, but it's about undergoing a transformation in how we understand, then live out God's love and mercy. When we look at compassion, which is viewing someone in love, this whole story is not about sharing the gospel. This whole story is about understanding, number one, that we don't see things the same way that God does. And in our default, we will judge. We will put our own feelings behind things. And we will feel sorry for ourselves. And we will get dramatic. And we will think and potentially get upset at who God is and what he does. But the entire meaning of Jonah is to actually look at people in a way that God sees them. It's not just a story that we get to listen to or read at times and understand that someone went through this kind of hero's journey. The hero's journey is actually in ourselves when we go from seeing someone as they are to that transformational process that happens in the renewing of our minds as we become more like Christ, to then seeing them how God sees them. And not just doing that, but once we see them, then choosing out of love to push them further towards how they grow in Christ. Whether that's discipleship, whether that's just friendship, whether that's evangelism, whether that's conversations with your family. Being compassionate the same way that God is compassionate. Seeing people not for what they deserve, but the hope that they could have, is the reason why Jonah in that story exists, in my perspective. Of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions and ideas and interpretations of how they read text. However, this is how I view Jonah and what that story means to us.